everyone, and welcome to the Continual Panel Room for our discussion of our Asimov favorites. I'm your host, Nancy Northcott. While Isaac Asimov was a problematic person in some ways, many who read his books were unaware of that side of him and loved those stories. This panel will focus on his work and not on his life beyond the page. Opinions expressed are those of the individual sharing them and do not represent Continual as an organization or the individuals who are part of it. And now that we've covered all that, let's start the actual panel. So if you would each please tell us a little bit about yourselves. If you remember the first story you read by Asimov, tell us that, and a little bit about what you liked about it. Stuart, will you start?
Hi, everybody. I'm Stuart Jaffe. I'm best known for the Max Porter Paranormal Mysteries, but I'm the author of getting near 70-some books now, 60-some, I forget. I lost count a long time ago. I've been writing for like 30 years, so if you try out my stuff and you like it, there's so much for you to dive into. And as far as Asimov, the first thing I ever read by him that I remember, and I tried to find the story again, so maybe somebody here knows the name of it, but it was my reading of Asimov happened during the so-called golden age to read Asimov, which was, I was like 15, 14. And the first story I ever read, it was one of the robot stories, and it was about this robot on Mercury that was just just going in circles, and they couldn't figure it out, and it all had to do with the way the rules of robotics, the laws of robotics were not working well together, and it got it stuck. And at that, I had not read much science fiction and fantasy at that point. Pretty much just was in. I think Asimov was the first after Heinlein that I'd ever read, and so it blew my mind. And from there, I kind of devoured a lot of his stuff for the next few years. So,
I believe that was one of the stories in the collection of stories of I, Robot.
It might be, yeah.
Okay, well, Dennis, actually, we're over to you.
Oh, well. I'm Dennis Myers. I am a science fiction author. I write science fiction in the far future. My first series, Rise of the Automated Empire, is available on Amazon, and my latest book is called Secret of the Umbacs. And the very first Asimov book I ever read was Foundation, followed by the next two books in that original trilogy.
Okay. Is it Ian or Ian? You're muted.
You're muted.
Am I? I hear
Not
you.
now. Sorry. I should have asked you that before we started. Is it Ian or Ian?
It's Ian.
Okay. Ian, would you go next, please?
Sure. Hi, I'm Ian Randal Strock because my parents decided to confuse the world, and they're doing a really good job of it. I think of myself as a science fiction writer, though the vast majority of my published words have been nonfiction. Punctilious Punctuation, my latest book, is just an example of that. But I don't get nearly enough time to write because I'm also an editor and a publisher. I run fantastic books, and my first job in science fiction was as the editorial assistant at Analog and Asimov science fiction magazines. And while I don't recall the first Asimov story I read, the one I remember, which it sticks with me, also is Foundation, because I read it in high school as my mother and my sister and I were rushing on to get onto the train to visit my grandparents in New York City. It was an 8-hour train trip from Buffalo. We rushed into the train. We sat down the only seats available, which were in the middle, so they were facing seats. Plopped down as the train starts rolling out, and I looked up to see my French teacher and his wife staring at me. And so I buried my nose in the only book I'd brought with me, which happened to be Foundation, and read it nonstop the entire trip to New York. And then I read the other two while I was in New York and on the way home.
Wendy?
Hi, I'm Wendy Van Camp. I am a Poet Laureate Emerita from the city of Anaheim, California. I'm a speculative poet, an author, an essayist, and writing coach. And my genre, of course, is science fiction for the most part, although I have been known to pen a lot of literary stuff these days, too. The first story of Asimov's that really hit me was a short story that he wrote called Profession, or it may even been a novella. It was a little bit longer. I hazard to guess it was a novella. The story is about a young protagonist who is denied education because of a kind of illness. But the story kind of turns on its head, and it turns out that it wasn't an illness at all. But I'm not going to go into it. If you haven't read Profession, highly recommend. And I went on to read more of Asimov's work. I don't think I've read everything he's written. I think of the big three in the golden age of science fiction, he came in second to Heinlein for me personally. That shows my age. This was way back in the 70s. It was a different time and place, and this is all we had, really. But there's a lot of things about Asimov's writing today that maybe might cause some concern. I don't know if it's particularly aged well, but so many of his concepts have worked into our real science now that I think we owe him a huge nod. And I really look forward to talking more about his work.
Well, as I said, my name is Nancy Northcott. In addition to writing historical fantasy, sometimes with and sometimes without strong romantic elements, I also write several different kinds of romance. And with Jeannie Adams, I write the Outcast Station science fiction series. I don't honestly remember what the first work of Asimov's I read was. I think it was a short story because I had a couple of his short story collections. S is for Space, I think, and maybe R is for Rocket, something like that. And I don't remember them particularly, but I liked them enough to pick up Foundation, when I was in college. And I really loved the whole concept of psychohistory and predictive analysis through the study of history because I'm a history nerd. And so that really appealed a lot to me. So as I said earlier, the title of this panel is our Asimov favorites. So we're just going to go around and everybody's going to give us one and then we'll talk about it and then we'll move to the next person. So Dennis, what's another Asimov that you really like?
Caves of Steel. That whole trilogy that introduces our Daniel Oliva was a favorite of mine. I found it shortly after Foundation. And in the fullness of time, when Asimov connected his Robots of Dawn series with Foundation, I really enjoyed it. It also helped build in me the idea of the huge connected universe.
Yeah. Anybody else want to speak to the Caves of Steel?
That you stole my suggestion. That was the one I was going to say. So, I mean, it's such a classic, and it. I think one of the things about Caves of Steel that makes it like Foundation so influential is it sets forth certain things that still with us. The robots and their rules and all that. He had played with it in various short stories, but this was the first book length work he did where it all comes together, and it's a mystery, which I happen to love mysteries. So mixing science fiction with mystery, he did it, and he did it really well. And I mean, both the 1-2 punch of Caves of Steel and Foundation. If you read those two, and you'll either be hooked on him as an author, or something's wrong with you. I don't know.
Anybody else? No? Well, I had not paid much attention to the robot novels. I saw the movie I, Robot, and we'll talk about media adaptations in a little bit. But I was teaching a class on science fiction, fantasy, and society. And we looked at the way societies treat those who are other, the role of technology in society, and the role of government. And the Caves of Steel fit that really well. So I read it and I liked it, but I liked it even more after the class discussion because they immediately glommed onto the otherness of Daniel being like the otherness of immigrants in our society at that time. And one of the students' families were immigrants and they had come here legally. But because she has a Mexican last name, she talked about some of the unpleasant experiences that she had had that kind of mirrored people's attitudes toward Daniel. And so that actually made me appreciate the book more because it meant it's a sign the book held up that people could still find themes to relate to with it. Ian, what about you?
Well, riffing on the mystery concept a bit, I remember reading Murder at the ABA when I was in college, and that wasn't it's not hard science fiction, but I remember thinking, wow, this book proves this is how you know you've made it as an author, when you can put yourself in as the comic relief as a character in a novel, and you can get away with that. And then as I got into science fiction and I actually started meeting and working with people and realized that there were a couple of real people in that book. I really enjoyed that one, just for the feeling of real people in a fictitious situation having a lot of fun.
Anybody else want to speak to that?
There I go, picking the oddballs.
Well, no, because he's written so much that aside from the ones that are the best known, it's highly unlikely that everybody will have read everything. So, Wendy, can you give us one? You're muted.
There we go. Favorite of Asimov. You guys have already hit some of the big ones. I think I'm going to just go back to that novella of Profession, because it really started me on the road of science fiction reading and writing in general. I heard it at a science fiction meetup back when I was in high school. So I was at that impressionable age. And we were just reading the story out loud in the meeting. And I was just struck by the story about this young outcast who wasn't able to get an education by being imprinted by machines to get the information that he would need to go on, to learn how to read and write and all that. In this story, Asimov, basically, the information was just zapped into people's brains at various stages in their life, until finally they chose their profession, and that information was zapped into their brain, and they would become a specialist in their field, in engineering or whatever. And the basis of their culture, this was the culture of Earth at the time, all these specialists would be sent out to various other planets, and Earth held a monopoly on the information because they only had the way to zap it into somebody's brain, evidently. But the story centered around a young man who they claimed they could not give the information to. So at the age of 4 or 5, he wasn't able to learn how to read and write this way. Instead, they sent him to a special school called the House of the Feeble-Minded. And he had to grow up in the House of the Feeble-Minded, where he had to learn everything step by step, the old-fashioned way. And he always felt he couldn't compete. He felt like he was a second-class citizen because of this. But he actually, the whole thing was very different, because toward the end, he wanted to run away from the house. And he suddenly realized, well, I can do this. And he was able to think how to do things and be creative about it, because he had learned everything step by step. And in the end, that was kind of the crux of the story. I'm giving it away to people. I'm sorry, but I love this story so much because it shows the value of hard work, the value of learning knowledge, and to be able to think out of the box. And these are things that I think are universal, that everyone in a society should know and learn and cherish. So in the end, he suddenly discovered that, in a society where all the information is zapped into people's head without them having to do anything, and thus they remain uncreative people, he was the true creative, and he was the foundation of all the power in the planet, because he had the ability to create. And this was such a unique concept to me, and I think it's kind of unique universally still. there's a reason Asimov was one of our big three. He had astonishing ideas for the future and for science. And these ideas have stuck with us. I mean, his 3 rules of robotics are now part of our droid factories and programming, and for future of AI. These are things that are ingrained in. He is the forerunner who thought all these things up and showed how they would work or not work, and worked out the bugs. And so when the industry, which was not even a gleam in anyone's eye at that time, finally came into being, it's on the foundation of what Asimov wrote. And I think it's just wonderful stuff.
Okay, let's sort of stay focused on one thing at a time. I don't disagree with your comments, but does anybody else want to remember that story or want to say anything about it?
Well, there's a different story thematically related to that, which is also on my list. That feeling of power in a far future, when we have computers and calculators who do all of our thinking for us, and the student who one day discovers that he can add without using the calculator. And again, it's learning that we can think, that we can create on our own without having to rely on the technology to do it. And that's one of the stories that I find myself frequently quoting, simply for the concept that though we have all this wonderful technology now, it's still what goes on in the brain that is the most marvelous thing we've got.
Okay. Anybody else? I think I read the story you're talking about, Wendy. And I think I liked it in part because I was a nerd kid. And the idea that you could learn stuff just really, I think, appealed to me a lot. Stuart, got one?
Well, of course, since I'm near the end, everybody's said anything. I have 2 things I want to bring up. One is something that I completely forgot about until as everybody was talking. I remember that Asimov wrote a bunch of what were then, back in like the 70s, called juveniles, which would now be like YA. Mm-hmm. But he did it under a pseudonym. And it was one of those things, I read them. They were like, they had a really very 50s, 60s kind of title too, like Johnny Space Boy or something like that.
Lucky Star and the ...
That's what it was. Yeah. And so he wrote those, and I didn't know that at the time I read them. And then later when I learned who he was, and I don't even know what the pseudonym was, but
Paul French.
There you go. See, I knew somebody would know. Those were great, just enjoyable. But since we've been talking about the Capes of Steel and robots and the law of robotics, something I wanted to bring up that when I was reading those books, which was of course before robotics existed, but not nearly like it does now. For me, a lot of what I found fascinating about those laws, and I think one of the reasons they still resonate now, isn't the actual laws themselves. It's the law of unintended consequences that you see relating. And it's done, and this is one of the things that I think makes Asimov's writing endure, is because he has the ability to take very complicated ideas and express them in a way that a 15-year-old reading it can go, I get it. And that's what, I mean, unintended consequences, which we deal with all the time, especially in politics, where, whoever it is makes, a group makes a law and everybody's like, well, that sounds good. And then 2 years later, we realize it's gone completely the wrong, everything's wrong about it, even though we intended it to be this way, or anything created on the internet. Social media is pure full of unintended consequences. But those things are so big and complicated, and it's hard for our puny human brains to grasp that many interconnected things. But here you have three simple laws that you read them and they all make a lot of sense. It's very clear how they connect to each other. What could possibly go wrong? And then he writes these little stories that show you it isn't so simple. Even when it's something so basic and simple like don't kill a human being. Pretty straightforward, and yet it's not. And I think that's a lot of why he endures. Because we could talk about it, I'm sure, but it's not like he was known for writing really in-depth characters or the beauty of his prose is very utilitarian. It's not flowery. It's not full of great metaphors and things. He just says what needs to be said and nothing more. And it's really powerful that way. I'll get off my horse now.
Anyone want to speak to what Stuart said?
Yeah. Killing a human being was off limits until I believe his name was Gaston, came up with the zeroth law, which put humanity above humans. And therefore, killing a human being in order to preserve humanity was on the table. And that flipped things around. So there were 4 laws by the end.
Yeah, but the 4th came much later.
Oh, yeah. I think it was like prelude to Foundation, if I'm not mistaken.
It was in the 80s at that point.
Yeah, definitely.
Anybody else? Dennis, you have one you'd like to share?
I keep thinking about Pebble in the Sky because it made a big impact on me. It's a time travel, and it is the ultimate fish out of water. It's this guy who gets projected like something like 800 years into the future from regular Earth all the way to the point where the Galactic Empire has already begun. And they don't even speak the same language, and he's got to relearn things. And, his beard starts growing, so he tries to point at it to the doctor, and the doctor gives him some cream, and he puts the cream on, and his beard goes away, and it never grows back. Okay. And I also remember that the cause of his time travel left a rift that was still emitting radiation. And then when I read, I think it was in Foundation and Earth, when they were discussing what happened to the Earth and how it became a radiation-polluted hellhole that nobody can live on anymore, he tied that into Pebble in the Sky. And I thought that was really super cool.
Well, bringing up the 3 or 4 laws of robotics and other things sort of puts the topic of world building on the table. So what did you think of Asimov as a world builder? And do you have a favorite world? And if it's something that you already mentioned, that's fine, but just tell us why you particularly like that world. Wendy, will you start?
I guess I'm first. I don't know. I think I rather enjoyed the concept of Trantor, the home world of the Empire. It was a planet entirely encased in the city. It was the city. It actually surrounded the Earth in many ways with sky bridges. But it was a contained world. They grew their food. They did everything that normal people would do. It was interesting how the Emperor kind of controlled things. Hold on a second. Now, forgive me, I'm getting over a cold. I just found the ideas really interesting. And what's fun is I'm starting to read scientific journals talking about creating some of these platforms in the sky for real and the science behind it and how it might be reachable by us in not all that further of time. But it all reminds me of Trantor that Asimov created way back in the 60s. So it's just fascinating.
Okay. Stuart, you got one?
Well, not a specific example as much as just I think, remember that he was writing in an age of the short story was like you could make a living being an author just writing short stories. And something I've always admired about his writing and that I try to do in my own is say as much as possible in as few words as possible. And so something that I'm curious what the rest of the group thinks, like somebody mentioned Prelude to Foundation, and his later books in the 80s where number of words and page count mattered, like for how it was shelved on the bookstore shelves and all that. And he started writing longer and longer books, and I found them to be less captivating. He really thrives when not given a lot of space, and yet he creates these incredible worlds. Foundation, the actual book, is not a story. It's not a single story. You all know this, but for those who haven't read Foundation yet, it's a group of somewhat lengthy short stories, not quite novellas, but long short stories that are all connected through time and characters, and create hugely complex political issues, entire worlds like Trantor and others, and he does it in a bare minimum. I mean, it's really a masterclass in how good writing makes a reader do most of the heavy lifting, if you choose the right words, which is of course the trick. But that's what I want to say about it.
I kind of like this concept because it reminds me of what we do as poets.
Sure.
We get the maximum amount of imagery with the least amount of words. And Asimov, maybe at heart was a poet in that way. His prose is very similar in that vein.
Dennis?
Yeah, I just I love the way he put things together. I was going to say Trantor. She already took that, so I'm going to say Gaia, the living planet near the end of his series. I just love the idea of this worldwide entity that was conscious and connected to everything.
Okay. Ian?
I'm not sure I have a favorite world he created. As Stuart said in the previous round, Isaac was much more of an idea writer than a stylist. It means that a lot of his fiction feels kind of dated when we read it today, but the ideas behind it are still so wonderful. So when I think of what he's written, I don't actually have images in mind. It's the ideas that I remember that I think about. But you mentioned Trantor, and I remember seeing in the Star Wars movies the first time they showed Coruscant, and I looked at it and I said, "It's Trantor."
I know, right?
Yeah.
Wendy, you got one?
Lucas stole from the best of them. That's all I have to say.
Wendy, I guess we started with you, didn't we? So has everybody been around?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I think so.
All right, great. Talking about the ideas that Asimov's books embodied, please expand on what you liked about that. And if there's a particular story that comes to mind, mention it for the benefit of those who may not be so familiar with that work. Stuart, will you start?
Well, gee, I already answered this one when I was talking about unintended consequences.
You want to take a pass and I'll come back to you?
Yeah. I'll think about that one.
Okay, Dennis?
Well, let's talk about intended consequences. In Foundation, one of the things that still sticks with me today was this trader who wanted to open up trade with this world, who was banning all trade because they didn't want the Foundation's influence to pollute them. And he got his ship, along with the cargo, impounded. And of course, the corrupt government split up the goods, and they were all using these goods for years. And then as they started breaking, people wanted the stuff back because it was better than anything else. And it taught me the power of trade. That trade can be more than just financial. It can help connect people together and connect cultures peacefully. And that even works in the real world.
Okay. Ian?
Without meaning to, about half of my published fiction has become time travel stories dealing with time and whatnot. And frequently I find myself referring back to Isaac's story, The Dead Past. The key plot point in it, the thought behind which it all centers is if you develop a time viewer, something that looks into the past, well, how long ago can it look? What is the past? Well, the past is actually a fraction of a second ago. So if you've got a time viewer that can see a fraction of a second ago anywhere, you've got a spying device that can see what's going on everywhere. And how the concept that remember, he was writing this in, I think that one was from the 1960s. The story with that concept in it turned on the fact that the idea of privacy is therefore completely destroyed, because now anybody doing anything can be seen with this time viewer. And we didn't actually need to invent that time viewer. We just needed to invent the internet and have people tell the entire world that they don't need privacy anymore. So it was both prescient and frightening.
Wendy?
Oh, I think I'm stumped on this one.
Okay, well, now
right.
it brings it back around to Stuart. I can come back to you if you want me to. Back to Stuart. So.
What Ian was talking about made me think of actually. So David Brin wrote a book called Earth, which at the time of its writing, which I think was the 90s, was looking 50 years into the future. And in that, he addressed the same thing. And I was not familiar with the story you just mentioned, so I didn't. It's just one of those funny things again, where in the Brin story, nobody has privacy because of an internet type of technology. To the point that if you do hide, like in it, they have really high-tech version of like Google Glass, and so you could look at anybody and just see their bank account, see anything you want about them. And if you have that stuff blocked, you're really rude. You're hiding something, and you're suspect, and all this kind of stuff. And I just find it interesting that idea actually. When I read that from Brin, I thought, oh, that's a really cool idea. I never really thought about, and it had that, but now I'm not surprised to learn that it came much earlier in a different version. And again, I think that's part of what makes Asimov endure now. As Ian was pointing out, that even though he's not a stylist, as you put it, I think his just the way it's not even necessarily the specific ideas, which can be exciting and interesting and influential, but it's the way he makes you think through anything. And I think that's kind of what I was trying to talk about earlier when I was talking about unintended consequences, is just that happened to be the concept that I pulled out of that. But there's, I'm sure, tons of other things that your brain could come up with about how those laws work together or don't work together, or what that means about how humans work together or don't work together. I mean, that's kind of what the entire Foundation series really is. Not the laws of robotics, but Foundation itself is about how, if we follow certain courses, we're going to either work together really well or not. And of course, in those, Harry Seldon pops up every so many centuries to say, "Hey, I saw this coming," and now and I think here's a great answer. Finally, I've got one for you. Like in one of the first big critical points in the psychohistory, there's just if I recall this huge armada coming down to just wipe out and take over a planet, and they're able to. Not only does he come out, Seldon appear and say, "Well, this was going to happen," but usually in those stories, the solution seems like such a minor little thing, like, "Hey, make sure you deliver this package to so and so, or say these words, or whatever it is." And that delivering that package ends up being a gesture of goodwill that stops this and has a domino effect that circles all the way back and stops an entire, war, or whatever the specifics are. And and I think that follows through a lot of the initial Foundation books. And I think part of that, what he's showing us, is the power of one person, the power of a small thing can have ripple effects, and that's what I got for you.
Wendy, you got one, or you want to take a pass this round?
Well, I rather enjoyed hearing Stuart go on about the butterfly effect in Asimov's writing. I find that very interesting, and I agree with him. Psychohistory was just such a hoot to read about. I mean, what a concept. And I don't know if anyone has before or since really done a lot with that idea. Maybe there are. I don't read everybody, of course. But I loved the concept of using science to look and mathematics to look ahead and to predict what's coming in a major way. You can't predict the individual, of course, but you can predict the big movements in history or in the future, so to speak. But even Harry seldom met his match, called the mule. But that's a discussion for another time, I think. Mm-hmm. But other than that, I think I'll pass.
Okay. Well, sort of picking up on what I think it was Ian who said that some of the books don't hold up as well as they did when you read them originally, which I mean, for me is true with almost every author I've ever read. There's something that doesn't strike me the same way. So I was wondering if there was anything of Asimov's that you had read some years back and then you read it again, and either you liked it more or related to it more, or it didn't quite strike you in such a favorable way. Ian, will you start?
Well, I fear I did him a disservice by saying he was not a stylist. He was only writing ideas, because as I said that, I then remembered The Ugly Little Boy, which is entirely an emotional story. It's heart-wrenching and it's wonderful. It's a time travel story itself of bringing a Neanderthal child into the modern era. And it's just emotional, and it's wonderful. His daughter Robin yelled at him for writing the story because it made her cry. So he can do that at times, but I think mostly what I remember him for is his ideas.
Okay. Wendy?
Well, I have to admit, when I read Asimov, his style of writing is a sign of the times. I think it was very male-dominated. It was very sparse. It went on at length with science concepts and mathematics, and almost all the characters were white men. And if there was a woman, she was just kind of there for eye candy or something. Not completely, but for the most part. And that kind of stuff doesn't fly. However, I have been going to a few workshops that point out that men and women tend to like different styles of writing. And I suspect Asimov's style appeals mainly to men and the way they innately think. And don't beat the messenger on that. But men tend to like things with more, like the spaceships and the details and the things like that. I certainly have met more than my share of fanboys at conventions who will talk for an hour about a spaceship and every little detail of it. Whereas women tend to look into different kind of things. We're more into communication, into emotional resonance and things of that nature. I have noticed that in the golden age, in the 50s and 60s, a more male-dominated style was the way writing was. It wasn't until the 70s, when more women entered the science fiction genre, that we had a more balanced approach. Until now, I would say a majority of writers these days are women, and their style of writing seems to have taken hold. And there are very few stories that maybe would appeal to young men, which is an argument why young men are not reading as much as young women these days.
So that could be a panel.
I don't know. Yeah, we might do a panel on that someday. But I think Asimov is a very good example of this. I mean, high concepts. He had interesting world building, but his characters were very on the surface, mainly white men. and they did a lot of technobabble, so to speak. So, but this was appealing to the young men of the time and to what was the perceived readership of that time. And it hasn't stood for the future as much as maybe some other writing has for that reason. I don't view it as innately wrong or bad. I still enjoy what I read, but when I read works from several decades back, I always keep in mind the culture that they were in and what was accepted at that time. And honestly, I forgive people for being in the culture of their time. I don't judge them by today's standards. I don't maybe believe what they write or how they perceive things, but I'm at a point where I know who I am and how I will act. I don't need to go 50 years into the back or 100 years in the back and criticize what was considered normal for their day. Okay. That's my opinion. Go ahead and give me hate mail if you wish.
Stuart, what about you?
Well, you said a lot there, and I think one of the things to pull out of that is that time period. Remember, science fiction at that time was called the genre. It was the genre of ideas. That's what it was all about. Those authors, Asimov and Heinlein and Clarke and all of them. That's what they were writing. That's what excited them and got that genre going. And it isn't until later that you get more female authors and other authors just in general who basically, after all the big names had gone through and spewed out all these ideas, they're like, okay, well, what am I going to write about now? and as technology started, I think, making a lot of ideas reality. I mean, when you're Heinlein, you can write about, rocket ships going to the moon, but once we've actually done it, that's no longer a wow, awe-inspiring thing. It's, oh yeah, we did that, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. So that's, I think, when a lot of writers started looking inward and looking at relationships and how do we, looking at what our human relationship is with technology, which is kind of what we've been dealing with for a long time now, especially as technology has gone beyond just machinery and computers, but you get into biotechnology and all kinds of things that we just trying to figure out how to deal with. And what we really need, right? We don't really have I take that back. There's one author I can think of, but contemporary authors right now handle a lot of these complex ideas very complicatedly and very well, many of them, but other than, I can think of Robert Sawyer, but other than him, I can't think of anybody who's really good at doing what Asimov did back then, of taking massively complex ideas and going, here it is very simply, except, of course, the great Dennis Myers.
Well, Dennis, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, here's a good book. I think there's a lot of people today who read the older stuff and they get offended or they take offense at the misogyny that was rampant in a lot of the early work. I mean, women couldn't do certain things. And they forget that that's not a part of the story as much as it's seeping in from the entire culture back then. And then you see, as these authors mature and they get into the later ages, they start fixing that. I'm not sure if Asimov ever really fixed it well, but I know other authors certainly did. And then, of course, for me personally, in 7th grade, I discovered Andre Norton books, and I started reading them. And it wasn't until my 3rd or 4th book that it was a hardcover, and inside the jacket was a picture of her. I'm going, oh, that's a woman. It's like, okay, whatever. And I read the book, and that started in me the idea that, oh, women do science fiction too. So.
Well, I considered myself very lucky at one point to stumble across a bookstore. The Lensman novels had been reissued. and I don't think I got all of them, but I got 5 of them. And I was very disappointed that the one real female character didn't have much of a role. But then again, the Lensman stories date back to the golden age of science fiction. And so they reflected the society, as Wendy was saying, in which they were written. And so I kind of read them with that context. But several years ago, when the Star Wars movies were reissued, might have been the Huffington Post, I'm not sure, did an experiment and had young women in their 20s watch Star Wars and recorded them doing it. And they kept going, where are the women? Why aren't there any women in this? And I'm thinking, I was sitting in the theater going, yay, the princess got a gun. Not where are the women. So, our perspectives change with time. And so some of the stories that I really used to love, I still enjoy them, but it's kind of like the back of my brain's going, where are the women? So, it's just, as we evolve and society evolves, I think our expectations change, even with things that we had really loved once upon a time. But I don't watch Star Wars and go, where are the women? I still go, yay, the princess has a gun.
I do think what you're saying, I think we have a problem making that distinction because Star Wars was only, almost not quite 50 years ago. Whereas, because I'm thinking of like, if I read a book from, if you read a Jane Austen book, nobody's sitting there going, why aren't these women, why are they behaving like this? Why are these people acting like, well, it's because but that's so far removed that we're able to treat it like an alien species almost of men and women in culture. And the truth is that the 1970s is an alien culture compared to today. And then, in the 1960s, even more so. And the further you go back, the more so. So I think for modern, for contemporary readers, especially younger readers who did not live through any of that, they have to look at, if they're going to approach something written in the 60s or 70s, it's almost like reading something that was written in the 20s or in the 1800s. It's just, you have to accept that this is not your world. And this is the world as it was then. And then you get Princess Leia not only getting a gun, but she actually is the one who saves them out of they didn't have a plan. They just got her, and they're like, and she's
the brains of the operation.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, it's perspective is a funny thing, and I guess if our perspectives don't change as we age, then we're not paying attention in some ways. But one thing I do want to talk about before we close it out tonight is the media adaptations of Asimov's different works. And I think we are back to Dennis to start. Is there one that you particularly like or could have liked better? Is that not your thing?
Liking one and not liking one, for me, it's a mixed bag. For example, I think the best adaptation was Bicentennial Man, and that's because Robin Williams was awesome and the story was very close to the original. But I love the Foundation series. I think it's great. Just, it's not the books. Separate that out. The books are over here in a different universe. What they have done with the Foundation series is they're telling a different story using bits and pieces from the books. And I love it. It's a great thing. But if you can't separate the books, and if you want to see the books on screen, that's not it.
I think
go ahead, Stuart.
I think everybody, well, I shouldn't speak for everybody, but we talked a little bit beforehand, and so I know most of everyone here at least really likes the Foundation series. And but the thing is, until that series existed, when I read Foundation, even when I read it a long time ago, I'm like, well, and you'd hear people trying to make it, I'd be like, you can't make that into a show. It's just never going to work. And I think they realized that and just took a left turn, So yeah, if you can separate them in your head, I think they're enjoyable.
Mm-hmm. I am.
Like Dennis, I was going to mention the Bicentennial Man because I think that's the only one I've seen that it brings the flavor of Isaac. I haven't seen the Foundation series. I don't get that channel. And I know I was disappointed in iRobot because it's just, they took the title and some character names and it's not Isaac stuff. And the one I haven't seen that I'd really like to and still haven't found it was apparently there was a planetarium adaptation of Isaac's favorite story, The Last Question. And he raved about that, but I've not seen it yet.
So if anybody out there knows where you can see The Last Question, when this goes up on the Continual page, please post that in the comments so that we can all go and find it. So Wendy, what about you?
Well, I think I recall seeing The Last Question, but I think I've seen it on YouTube, just somebody reading it and doing like photographs to go along with the story, but it wasn't an actual media production. But I love that. That was another example of a great short story, though. I, of course, would love to talk about Foundation. I do agree about the iRobot with Will Smith. I enjoyed the film, but it was not Isaac Asimov's writing. It just had his title on it. But it was still a fair science fiction movie, I would say. The series on Apple TV, Foundation, is it blows me away. It's one of our better science fiction series currently. And if you have means to see it, I do recommend that you go ahead and check it out. I love the changes that they made. They do pull in a lot of the elements from the Foundation series. But, Foundation started as a series of short stories. It was never a cohesive novel to even begin with. None of the characters are the same from story to story. But I love how the series created a balance of a continuation of character throughout the series in a way that makes sense in the Foundation universe. I love the Cleons. If you haven't seen it, you don't know what I'm talking about, but trust me, it's a wonderful concept to create continuity in a story. And I like how they created the continuity with Harry Seldon in a very modern way. When Foundation was written, the idea of anyone speaking in the future was so foreign because we didn't have the technology. But now, recording things for your family after you die is actually quite common. People do it all the time. And turning Harry Seldon into an AI made the most logical sense because it made him immortal. It made him to have agency as a hologram. He can appear. We don't have to explain what a hologram is. We just innately know now. So a lot of these concepts come in from our today technology, futurized a little bit, but still in keeping with the original ideas that Asimov created. And I just love the way they illustrate psychohistory in that little gizmo that they hold in their hand, and it lights up and you kind of see the mathematical patterns or what. I love that. As a illustrator, I just love the art of that. But yeah, it's not Isaac's Foundation, but it is still a story worth watching. So again, highly recommend.
Okay, Stuart?
Well, everybody's already mentioned all the stuff, but since it's been mentioned a few times, iRobot, which I think is just a horrible movie. I mean, if you can turn your brain off, it can be a popcorn movie, and I think that's how they intended it. But for me, the part that just not only made it not Asimov's work, but kind of betrayed Asimov's work was there's a scene where all these robots are just lined up in rank and file, and he's trying to figure out which one is the one that he's trying to find that actually seems to have broken out of following all the protocols, and that's one of the stories I remembered quite well, and I remembered that I can't think of her name, but the scientist, the computer scientist,
Susan Calvin.
What?
Dr. Susan Calvin.
Yeah, Susan Calvin. So in the book, she comes up with this whole like series of questions that they could ask that would help determine, and they go one by one, working through, trying to figure out. It's a real mystery, and it's awesome. And Will Smith just shoots one guy and looks for a reaction, and I'm just like, that's so lazy and cheap and annoying, and and just totally misses the point of what Asimov was doing. And so it bugged me. It irked me so bad that I just hate that movie.
Meanwhile, I'm sitting there going, it's the one with the blue eyes.
Well, is there anything that anybody would like to talk about that we haven't already touched upon?
Well, I do want to say I'm very much looking forward to Rendezvous with Rama via Denis Deneuve. He did a bang-up job with Dune, and I'm certainly looking forward to what he does with the Rendezvous story. It'll probably be really incredible.
Which, for those who don't know, is Clarke, not Asimov.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, that's okay.
Me.
I mean,
the same time period.
Well, they each said the other was the best science fiction writer, so that's fine.
Well, I think it's time for us to wrap up then. If you would, tell people where they can find information about you and your work. If you have a new, recent, or upcoming release that you would like to spotlight, this is a good time to do that. Stuart?
You can find me at stuartjaffe.com, or I'm on Facebook as Stuart Jaffe. I don't know when by the time this comes out, I will probably have the 20th book in the Max Porter series, Southern Loss, which is coming out on February 3rd. And there's a lot and for science fiction lovers, I have my Pathway Ring series. Pioneers of the Pathway is the first one, and that's multi-generational epic science fiction kind of story, much like what we've been talking about with Foundation and other things that just stretches across a huge swath of history. So throw that out there for you.
Okay. Dennis?
You can find my work, you can find me at automatedempire.com. My latest book, Secret of the Ombex, is out. And I have links to all of my books on automatedempire.com. They go to Amazon, but it's there. I also have like T-shirts and cups and fun stuff like that. And just as a quick note, Stuart is a more of a mystery writer. So when he writes his really, really good Pathway series, he wraps it in a mystery. And I just absolutely love that. So read his books too.
Ian?
My home on the web is ianrandalstrock.com. I also have ianstrock.com because it's easier to spell. And I am the publisher at fantasticbooks.biz, so you can check us out there. My name is unique on the internet, so you can find me on Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, Ko-fi, and LinkedIn. I have no idea where else I am.
Okay. Wendy?
Hi again, I'm Wendy Van Camp, and you can find me at wendyvancamp.com. I'm on Instagram as No Wasted Ink. And you can find me on LinkedIn as well, just like Ian, and a host of other places. If you are on Medium, most of my poetry and many of my short stories and memoir and writing tip essays are available to read there. And I am on Amazon as well. My latest book is The Planet's Companion, which is a chapbook of sci-fi coup poetry based on the planets of our solar system. My original book, The Planets, is of a similar theme, and it was an Elgin Award nominee. And you can find me there. My name is it's somewhat unique, but not so hard to find like Ian's might be. So just look for me wherever you would normally look for an author. You'll find me.
You can find me at nancynorthcott.com, some variation of Nancy Northcott or at Nancy Northcott on pretty much all social media. My next release will be later in the spring, and it will be The Speaker for All, the next novel in the Outcast Station science fiction series. So thank you very much to everyone who's participated in the panel. Thank you to everyone who's watching. And remember, you can always find discussions of cool stuff on the Continual Panel Room.